So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Drake. And I know we had some folks travel in from different states. I think, Tam, maybe you came the farthest from Minneapolis this morning. So the intent of this meeting really is to bring, since we have such a concentration of reps and advisors located in the Midwest, we thought we'd bring everybody together. And really the intent of the meeting is a couple-fold. One, to share some value-added information going on at the firm level. As you know, there's a lot of things going on in the industry around the Department of Labor. And also we have some new, product-related and solution-oriented solutions to share with you today as well. So it's a good opportunity to get folks together and do some networking at the end and do some peer-to-peer networking. So that's really the intent of the meeting today. I want to just thank everyone for taking a half day, or in some cases a full day, out of their schedules to travel in, and we're looking forward to spending the afternoon with you. So the theme of the meeting is really, if you've heard Wayne Gretzky speak before, great hockey player, he always said he skates to where the puck is going, not so much where it is today. And in our industry, as well as within your practices, that theme probably can't resonate more, right? We're always trying to figure out where are we going from here. So each presenter today is kind of tasked with working that theme into their presentation, so you can hopefully take some of that information back and skate to where the puck is going within your practices. That's the theme for today's meeting. This is interactive. If you have questions, certainly each presenter will have some time saved within their presentations to ask questions within their presentation, but as we go, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll address those questions as we go. I want to point out just the home office folks that are here, starting with Dan Schlesser over here in the corner. Raise your hand, Dan. Hello. Stacy Oliar, who's the Chief Compliance Officer on the LSIA side. Jim Baldwin, Chief Investment Officer for LaSalle Street Securities. And Andy Carava from the Fixed Income Desk. Who did I miss? Jerry Martin. Most of you know from our Fixed Income Department. Sorry about that, Jerry. And we have other folks coming from some of the managers from the different departments coming over to join us throughout the day. So just a kind of review of the agenda here. We're going to start the day I'm going to give you a few updates on some things that are going on within LaSalle Street, just to kind of level set and on where we are at the firm level. We're pleased to have Jeff Ward from Sybaris Partners here, and he's going to get fairly deep into the Department of Labor issues. Hopefully today is not the first time that you've heard about this. I know that's not the case in this room, but there's a lot going on here. So I think it's a little premature to make any hard recommendations on what to do yet, but we are very close to this at the firm level. And I know some of you, I heard, even attended the Fidelity webinar last week around the Department of Labor. So I don't know how many of you attended that, but I heard that was a pretty good session as well. I know there was 3 or 4 of us at the home office that were on it. I know Stacy was on it, Dan was on it, I think Jim was on it. So if you have questions about what we're doing at the home office, we could certainly talk to you individually about that. But I think we're going to get a little deep into that topic today. We have a very exciting new platform, asset management platform under the something we've titled Salt Creek Investors, which is under the LSIA brand. It's a proprietary platform that we're getting ready to roll out. And for some of you, it might be the DOL answer. So Jim Baldwin's going to tee that up for you. And we have Jim Caffin from Sortino Investment Advisors, which is kind of the engine or the algorithm behind the models, and he'll give us a presentation as well. We'll take a quick break. We're happy to have Nancy Harris and Mike McElroy from Fidelity Clearing and Custody, which is the new name, right?
Yes.
Nancy will talk a little bit about that, and they're going to do a workshop around sourcing leads within your practice, which is a very good workshop. And then Jeff Johnson from Sierra Funds. Many of you know Jeff and have met with Jeff before, but he has an interesting presentation to wrap up the day. We'll spend about from 3:15 to 4 doing some peer-to-peer and just networking, so a few cocktails, some hors d'oeuvres, and by 4:15, we're going to wrap up and send you on your way. So that's the day. So let me just spend 5 minutes maybe just on some updates at the firm level. I'd say, Dan could probably talk about this a little bit better than I could, but, from a fiscal and regulatory perspective, the firm is in fantastic shape. Probably the best it's been since the 2008, crisis. Really no regulatory or legal events that we're heavily involved in right now. And from a revenue and fiscal perspective, the firm remains profitable, and it's probably in the best shape from a fiscal and regulatory perspective that it's been. And we feel we have a responsibility not only to the home office employees, but to the reps and advisors to keep it that way. That's what when we come to work every day, those are the things that we're thinking about. Year-end rep survey results. I think we had 65 responders to the survey, and on average, we do a survey twice a year now, and we always have a 95% plus score from a satisfaction perspective. I think this time was 96.5 or something like that. So we maintain very high survey results, and I just want to thank everyone in the room who completed. I don't think it's 100%, but a lot of you completed that survey this year, and we really appreciate the feedback. We rolled out a 15 for 16 incentive campaign, which is all around growth within your practice. So the intent here is if you grow your business 15% year over year, we'll provide a kickback or a payment, a 1% payment back to you. And I think we had 6 reps last year attain that goal, and we paid them. I think the number was $25,000 back in rebates. And then the 2016 Leaders Conference. As you know, we host a Leaders Conference every year, $250,000 in revenue or production to qualify. This year we're going to Boulder, Colorado. And I know we have several folks in the room that qualify, but that's coming up. That's something we do every year. And then from a new business focus perspective, we're always looking for new reps. The right business we have a great or a very thorough due diligence process. So anytime you have referrals or a rep that may be looking to switch firms, we're more than willing to work with those. And then on the small BD side, you may have heard me talk about the consolidation in the industry on the small BD side, and we have a couple folks in the room today that have joined us over the last couple of years. Ron Feltus from Heartland in Iowa joined us last year, and Stan Klimek. Stan, if you can just raise your hand. He's from Capital Securities here in Chicago, and he'll be joining us, or is in the process of joining the firm. He has about 15 reps under his umbrella, and he'll be joining us as well. So that's a little bit of an update at the firm level, and I don't know if anybody has any questions regarding that, but those are kind of some high-level things that are going on at the LaSalle Street level. So I want to introduce Jeff Ward. As I mentioned, Jeff is with Sybaris Partners, based in Wisconsin, and I spent a little time with Jeff on the phone over the last couple of weeks about the whole DOL fiduciary standard. You've heard a lot about it. Jeff is very, very dialed into this topic, and I think he'll take us fairly deep today on kind of where we are with this thing and probably where he thinks it's going. And I think if you have questions, Jeff would be a good one to bounce it off. If you want to talk a little bit more about what we're doing at the firm level around the DOL, we certainly, Dan, myself, Jim, we certainly be willing to talk to you throughout the day or individually after this meeting. So let me bring up Jeff, and we'll get started. Page down.
Okay. Well, I was going to stand behind the podium for protection because in this particular topic, you get a certain depth into it and things start flying at the speaker. So I'm going to trust that doesn't happen here. First of all, I want to thank Jim, Jerry, Mark, all the leadership at LaSalle for inviting me to be a part of this. I've actually known these guys for a long time. In my prior life, which I was with MetLife for 29 years, and we kind of lost touch for a little while, though, because for the last 7 years of that, I ran a company called the Pension Resource Center. And the Pension Resource Center, you might have actually heard of it, but maybe not. But it was basically for all of the MetLife, Tower Square, Walnut Street, all those reps, basically helping them through all kinds of qualified plan issues. And in that role, I also was very tied into the government affairs for the company in Washington. I sat on the SIFMA committee for retirement savings and a lot of things, because we actually went through the entire cycle the first time this came around. Back in 2009 and finally kind of dropped off in 2011. Back then, if you recall, just to kind of rewind a little bit, this very rule was proposed back then, and it was ultimately squashed by significant pushback from the industry. At that same time, though, and I think this is very important to understand, at that same time, there were 3 other proposed regulations that did in fact go through. And they were a little painful as well. One was coming out with rules on investment advice, which are in fact in place today. The second one was 408B2, which was a sponsor level disclosure, and it was really particularly painful for any kind of service provider, most especially insurance companies and mutual fund companies. And then there was 404A, which was individual disclosure. All of these things are related. And what they really come down to is the origin of what ERISA and the Department of Labor are all about with regard to this topic in the first place. So what I thought I would do in the time that I have, limited as it is, and feel free afterward, we'll talk. I'm not going to do a product commercial. I will introduce our wholesaler, though. Ezra, if you would stand up. We are the exclusive distributors for Eagle Life, which is a fixed index annuity provider. That's all I'm going to say about it, because this is an important topic. I want to get right to it. But I will say that you will be hearing from Ezra about the things that we have to offer. What I thought I'd do is talk real briefly about the origin of all this stuff, why it's happening in the first place. We'll go through the deck that is prepared by the attorneys. And then we'll also talk about my perspective on what to expect, the development of it from here, and then my thoughts on how you, as a registered rep or an investment advisory rep, combine what you do. Okay? Anytime we talk about ERISA, I think it's a good place to start by saying that it is not an intuitive piece of legislation. This has been around since 1974. And it has governed qualified plans all of that time. It actually does not say anything about IRAs. However, the Department of Labor has taken it upon themselves to take these rules and apply them to IRAs based on a presidential authorization letter to Jimmy Carter in 1978, if you can believe that. Now, the reason why they're doing it in the background is real simple. They don't want to have all of the qualified plan business leak out into IRAs because they have 2 separate rules. That's really what it comes down to. They're very concerned. They talk a lot about leakage from the, from the qualified plans, the 401ks in particular. So the thing about ERISA, though, they're applying these kinds of rules over to IRAs, and it seems very counterintuitive to us. Because you see, the kind of work that we do, we live in a world where we pretty much can do what we want to do, but we have parameters, okay? You can't jaywalk, you can't, drive too fast, you can't kill people, you can't sell terrible things to your clients, and so on. ERISA is just exactly the opposite. ERISA starts from the premise that if you provide a service to a client for a fee, you cannot provide it for a fee. That's where it starts. It literally actually says that. If you are a service provider, you cannot provide a service for a fee. Unless you have what is called an exemption to what otherwise is considered a prohibited transaction. So it starts with the idea that every transaction is prohibited. But if you have a specific exemption, with the key word being on specific, that is very narrow, that you can provide that service for a fee under that exemption. So it really kind of forces us to reverse our thinking. And the reason that that's helpful to think about is because there's so many times that you'll say, this just doesn't make any sense. And you know what? You're right. It doesn't make any sense. The Department of Labor is going after what they see as a very, very key objective. They're very myopic about it, and it's one thing that you can say in a sentence that they're after. They believe the public has been subject to tainted advice. I went to the public hearing back in 2009 when Phyllis Borsey hosted a bunch of people coming in talking about this. That topic came up unbelievably, often. That they want to get rid of what they perceive to be tainted advice. Now, anybody in this room believe that you give tainted advice? No. You take care of your customers. I was just sitting with one of your peers here that's done this for 34 years. You don't stay in this business for 34 years by giving bad advice to your customers. The truth is, when you're selling a product, you're really not truly giving quote-unquote advice, right? That actually takes place over in the IAR side. What the department is saying is, we got to bring this together. That the objective advice that you are giving on the IA side, because you are a stated fiduciary, you therefore have all of the prudent standards attached to you, that we're doing that on the commission side too. And they're going to make it really hard. So that is really the background of why they're doing what they're doing. Now, let's just kind of go through, is it this? Yeah, here we are. So, basically, they proposed this new definition of what it means to be a fiduciary. The old definition of what it means to be a fiduciary by way of investment advice was a 5-part definition. The trouble for the department is that you have to hit all 5 parts. It reads like a contiguous sentence. If you do each of these 5 things, then you become a fiduciary. They find it too easy to slip out of that. And so at the end of the day, the new fiduciary rule in the last 40 years, unless there's an exemption, and you cannot provide the service. But if you provide that service and you're deemed a fiduciary, then you have to follow certain rules, and that's where the fiduciary investment advice rules come in. So now their idea of being a fiduciary by way of investment advice, they're attaching to qualified plans. They're also attaching it to IRAs. Any broker, any salesperson, mutual funds, financial institutions, they are including everybody in this. This is a very, very wide net. Sometimes when I was at MetLife, people would say, gosh, you guys at MetLife, you got to go in there and teach them a lesson, tell them what to do. I'm like, MetLife is big, but the Department of Labor is much, much bigger. So the definition of advice is broad and basically may include conversations between an individual producer and a potential consumer about retirement products. So just having the conversation is something that can trigger the fiduciary rule. And I'm going to go through these quickly. I will make this available to you in the detail because I just want to hit the highlights of this for perspective. But I will make this available. We'll get it to Jerry and circulate it. So, in this rule that they're putting out, it's so broad and it hits so many people in so many parts of the industry that it really has had a strong bipartisan opposition. Now, just because they have strong bipartisan opposition does not mean that everybody gets together for legislation. And that's what's been happening, unfortunately, over this rule. If under this, I think you've all heard, and we don't need to go over it, I don't think in detail, about the best interest contract exemption. How many people have heard that? Is it pretty? Okay. In a sentence, what's happening here is that if you are going to collect a commission for providing a service by selling a product or administering that product, then you will become a fiduciary under the rule. And that would require you, and that's if you are service existing or sell new, they consider all the same. And under that rule, you would have to put together what's called a best interest contract. The reason it says best interest contract, BICE is its best interest contract exemption. That's the exemption that you would meet to be able to be permitted to be paid for the service you're rendering to the plan or the IRA, okay? So this particular exemption is very, very narrow. It is only for people that sell products to these programs and are therefore going to be deemed a fiduciary. If you are an RIA or if you are an IAR of an RIA, selling an IRA, how's that for a tongue twister, right? Nobody thought about that. If you are in that world right now, well, then you are acting as an investment advisory representative. You are already a fiduciary, so it doesn't apply over there. This whole best interest contract exemption applies to the sale of products. Now, the big problem there's a number of big problems with the best interest contract. A lot of it, is just basically saying that you're conflicted, that you have to still put their interest first and so on. But that's not the big problem. The big problem is that this particular, by statute, this particular contract would be subject to adjudication at the state attorney general's office in the state the business is done. That's a whole different ballgame. We live in a world today of arbitration. We live in a world that doesn't include the state attorney general and a bunch of trial lawyers coming after people and having it adjudicated at the state level. This is why a lot of broker-dealers look at this and say, can't do it. Now, that has everybody up in arms, including a number of Democrats. There were 100 Democrats back in November that sent a letter to the DOL chief, Perez, saying, listen, you got to let us know what kind of changes you're contemplating to this because, our constituents are very concerned that what's going to happen is you'll be required to do this best interest contract. Nobody's going to want to do it. If you don't do it, you can't get commissions for a product sale and with a security. We're going to talk about what happens at Fix here in a minute. What happens to these people? Who's going to take care of them? The Department of Labor really has not taken that, frankly, into consideration to the extent that they should. They're not looking at the real life impact of this. That's what Democrats and Republicans are saying. Now, they're saying it right now to the Office of Management and Budget. Here's the process that takes place. Department of Labor proposes a rule, goes through public hearing, and looks for public comment. There were over 2,800 letters that came back through public comment. That was roughly about 8 times more than the first time around back in 2009, just to give you perspective on the pushback. They had a public hearing. If you've ever been to a public hearing by the Department of Labor, it's some of the best political theater you'll ever see. They line people up, and you would think that they would say, well, let's hear from the financial services industry. Okay, now let's hear from the AARP type groups, and let's hear from the administrators. No. What they do is they line them up. They put 3 at a time at a table, and they are from each of 3 different disciplines. And so it begins to start looking a little bit like a Republican debate. They're all, no, which they love because the departments are sitting there saying, see, and so after the public hearing, they took back the comments. They supposedly made changes. But what's really troubling to everybody is they have not revealed anything about the changes. And this letter of 100 Democrats coming at the department saying, listen, you got to tell us something here because we're worried. And Perez said no. So it would lead you to believe that the changes are meager, if any. And if that's the case, then there's going to be more trouble. Now, the process is that once they make whatever final changes that they believe become the final rule, they have to send it to the Office of Management and Budget, which is known as OMB. OMB has the obligation of assessing this from a broader perspective, most notably what is the overall impact to the American people. How is that impact in any way exacerbated by other rules from other agencies, which brings into question the SEC. Now, the SEC has been strangely silent on this stuff, even though, if you think back, Congress gave them the mandate that they would come up with a system by which there would be a both RIA business and registered rep business, that there would be a common rule that would take things out of being where they are today into having a fiduciary standard, a unified fiduciary standard. Because right now, broker-dealers, we have a suitability standard. RIAs, standard of care. When you get into the ERISA business, it's another notch up, and it's called exclusive benefit. It's the highest fiduciary standard that you can have. Now, if you are an IAR and you take on business that you're giving investment advice to, and you become a fiduciary by way of investment advice, you do rise to that standard, even though on your non-qualified business you would be at standard of care. So the SEC really hasn't done anything until all of a sudden, after October, we had a number of things happen. You had Ann Wagner put out a bill saying, whoa, wait a minute, this thing is a train wreck, and the premise there is that it violates the Retail Investor Protection Act, was an act from the 1940s, stating that you got to have the SEC involved in this. And then you had some piling on, and you've had some bills coming from Phil Rowe, you've got Peter Roskam, and Richard Neal. Are the kind of the key authors of some of these, and they're Republicans and Democrats that are all coming up saying, listen, you really haven't looked at the impact of this, and you need to make changes. Instead of going after the investment, the Protection Act, what they came out saying, and they're still saying, is there's a recognition that what you're trying to do is right, but the way you're doing it is wrong. That's the simplest way to put it. And that the legislative solution for that would be that they would have a stated set of principles to abide by to come up with a legislative fix to this instead of a rulemaking fix from an agency like the Department of Labor. Now, just in the last week, Paul Ryan has really spoken up on this on like 5 different occasions. By the way, you can follow these things on thinkadvisor.com. There's a lot of different updates that come out on ThinkAdvisor. There's also a lot of updates that come through on Investment News. So you can get those online and they can come to you regularly. But Paul Ryan has been championing this in a big way. And unfortunately, where we're at right now is we're just circling the airport. I mean, we're just waiting. And if it comes out of OMB, which it is supposed to do at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, usually takes 90 days, they're accelerating it. If it comes out with basically very little change, if any, from the original proposal for this best interest contract exemption, then it's going to give some fuel to a potential legislative solution. Now, the industry is not, I have to be frank with you, the industry is not hopeful that that's going to happen. Because even if there is a legislative solution put out, there's also this thing called a veto threat. And it's very likely that that would happen. The next best thing is a potential judicial solution, and you have organizations like SIFMA and others that are preparing for a potential suit against the Department of Labor, if nothing else to slow it down, to push it in the next administration. So a lot going on, and unfortunately, until it comes out of OMB and we get the facts on what the changes are, it's hard to say exactly what trajectory this is going to take. Now, with regard to fixed index annuities or fixed annuities in general, just fixed insurance products, the interesting thing there is that the exemption that they rely on is not going to be wrapped up, as we understand it, is not going to be wrapped up under this best interest contract. And a lot of the reasoning for that is because much about the best interest contract is about disclosure of fees. And I mean some really rigorous disclosure of fees. With the typical fixed index annuity, unless you attach the rider onto it, there are no fees because it is a general account product. The money is basically a fixed annuity. you are actually being credited interest. It just happens that the interest that is credited is based on a certain methodology, typically tied to an index like S&P. Now, when that happens, as I illustrated before, for you to be able to render a service to a qualified plan, or in this case an IRA, and receive a fee for it. Now keep in mind their definition of fee is anything. I give you a watch, that's a fee, all right? Any kind of compensation in their idea at the DOL is a fee. If you provide that service for a fee, you have to rely on what? A prohibited transaction exemption. Well, the one that we have relied on for the last 35 years, actually it'd be since 1984, so it was at 32 years, has been 8424. Prohibited transaction exemption 8424. That has specifically been the exemption that allows a person to sell a fixed insurance product. Actually, it was inclusive of variable annuities and mutual funds, but those are now being taken out. But if you sell, a fixed insurance product, then it is by way of that particular exemption that you are allowed to do that activity. Do you see how backwards this thinking is? That is, by all accounts, going to remain the same. Now, the good thing about that, which is in all of this verbiage that I've clearly have kind of abbreviated here for your benefit, is that you would still be held to account as a fiduciary. You would still be held to fiduciary standards. You would still be held to acting in the best interest of the client, but not with a contract. That's key. That's a big deal. And so what's likely to happen here in praxis, I mean, we talked a little bit about what's likely to happen in terms of the actual reg. In praxis, what's really likely to happen here is, as you've probably heard from some of the other presentations that you've heard from Fidelity and others, I have a memo here from a different broker-dealer, that people are preparing for the worst. And of course they have to, because they're talking about an 8-month runway to have this implemented prior to year end. And the reason they want it done prior to year end is there's something happening next year that slips my mind, but it's big.